Happy New Year, friends, and welcome back to There in Tobacco again. My name is Logan. Thanks so much for visiting my channel today. I hope that you all had a very good New Year's Eve, a very safe New Year's Eve, and a blessed New Year's Day. You might have noticed that I created a new intro. I hope that you enjoy it. I figured New Year, let's ring it in with something new on the channel. So that's a new intro that I have been working on over the weekend, and I hope that you like it. So today we're jumping back into our discussion about blending tobaccos, and today we're talking about that very special condiment tobacco, Perique. Perique seems to be one of those love it or hate it type of tobaccos in the pipe community. And Perique has a very interesting history, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I've talked to a lot of pipe smokers, and there seems to be this dividing line of people that absolutely love it and want to get as much of it in their blends as they can, or those that hate it and avoid it at all costs. And it's strange because the notes on both sides of that dividing line, people detect very different qualities of what they assume is the Perique in the blend. And Perique is milder than you think, and probably what is attributed to Perique are flavors from the other tobaccos that it enhances, because Perique has a very mild flavor on its own, and it enhances the flavor of other tobaccos, kind of the way salt enhances the other flavors of food. So let's take a look at the texture. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different in that I'm going to actually smoke some straight to show you that you shouldn't be afraid of it, and to issue a challenge to do that yourself, especially those of you who say that you hate Perique, because I would guess you've never smoked it on its own. Perique, the smell of Perique is very unique, that it smells like mushrooms and flowers, and honestly, there's so much going on. There's sort of a fermented fruit, but that's hard to imagine what fermented fruit might smell like. It's got a kind of a tang, but it's also got meatiness to it, it's a very heady sort of smell. Very rich, like a meat would be. And that's not a super appealing adjective to use for a tobacco, but that's what we're dealing with. And the texture and the look of it is dark, almost black, very dark brown, almost black. And it comes very moist. Now, a little bit of history here about Perique is that in 1776, French-Canadian settlers called Acadians, which is where we get the word Cajuns from, they came into the Louisiana Territory, and they witnessed the Choctaw and the Chickasaw Indians cultivating a tobacco that was different than any they had seen. It was similar. In fact, it's in essence a type of burley, but it wasn't one that they had seen or smoked before. But more interesting was the way that they were curing the tobacco, in that they were using hollowed out stumps. They would take the tobacco once it's harvested, strip the leaves off, put it into tree trunks, and then pile it up with stones to press them. And they were essentially creating so much pressure in that tree trunk that it was removing all the air, and they were creating an anaerobic type of fermentation in the leaf. And Pierre Chenet, which is the farmer that that observed this. In fact, a little bit of trivia: Pierre Chenet, his nickname was Perique, which is why we call it Perique. He witnessed this and adapted the process using wooden boxes in 1824 and started producing this commercially. And so he would use the box instead of the hollowed out tree trunk. Now, in the early 20th century, this was further adapted using burned out whiskey barrels, because inside of the whiskey barrel, there's no whiskey, but there are those good microbes and bacteria left in the wood, which aid in that fermentation process. So it was a good match up there. And just like it was done by the Indians in 1776, the process continues. Much the same way. The only thing that's changed is the container, basically. And now they get the stalk. It's a pretty intensive process of the way that they harvest, because they keep only a certain number of leaves on the plant, and then they harvest it. They air dry it, so it is first air cured like a burley, and then once they take it down, they re-moisturize it. In fact, they moisturize it so much that it's dripping wet, and then they roll it into these little torpedo-shaped sort of things called torques, and then they put it in the whiskey barrel, that burned out whiskey barrel, and they put it in layers, all these different layers of these rolled torques of tobacco, and then they put what's basically like a screw vise on top of the whiskey barrel and apply about 30 tons of pressure using this. And they keep turning it and they keep turning it, and what that does is the moisture that they've added plus the pressure drives out all the air, which can cause it to mold, and then the cell walls of the Perique burst, of the tobacco burst, and so it begins to kind of ferment in its own juices. And about every 90 days, they release the pressure, reintroduce air into it, and then repile everything back on and do it again. And they do it for a year. That's how long the curing process takes. And so when it's done, it comes out with this fully fermented, mushroomy, meaty, almost like leaves that are kind of breaking down in a sort of way. Almost, I wouldn't call it rotted, because they're not rotted, but it definitely doesn't smell in the can on its own like any tobacco else that's out there. That's why it is incredibly, it's actually pretty rare among the tobaccos. In fact, there are presently, as I understand it, there are only 2 places that are doing the curing of this. There are 25 growers of this leaf, and only 2 people, 2 companies that are producing the Perique. And one is pure Perique, and another one is sort of an adapted, where they use partial Perique and partial other types of tobacco. And the one that is making pure Perique is a company called L.A., I believe it's Posh or Poche, in St. James Parish, Louisiana. And a few years back, Hurricane Katrina nearly wiped the industry out. In fact, it was almost on the verge of extinction. And Mark Ryan of Daughters and Ryan came in, bought L.A. Posh in the production, and has single-handedly saved the production of Perique. And now it's probably more available than it's ever been. They're making great amounts, and hopefully it'll continue to make a comeback and we won't have that type of scare again. So let's talk about how to blend with it. Blending with this tobacco is somewhat delicate, and a lot of people don't like to add it because they think it makes the blend strong. It does not make the blend strong. It is a high nicotine content. In fact, just under dark-fired Kentucky that we talked about last week, it is just under that in terms of nicotine content. But in flavor, in fact, with that note, I've already done my first light. I'm going to light it up right now, and smoke while I talk about blending. When you first light it up, and it is so moist that it to get the starting light, it took me about 4 matches to get a decent light on it. And I'm smoking it in my, this is kind of a no-name meerschaum. I got it from an estate. And the most surprising thing when you smoke it on its own, alone, and don't be afraid to do that. You might have heard that it's incredibly strong, that'll make you weak in the knees, whatever. Try it. The air, the aroma of it is floral. Some people give it sort of a black pepper taste, and you barely get a hint of that. The taste is not overwhelming. In fact, you get kind of a floral taste. You get kind of a dried fruit flavor on it. Barely a hint of the black pepper. It does not burn the tongue. The closest thing that I can say this tastes like as you smoke it is wine, red wine. There's a slight tingle, like you might get from wine tannins. You get the fruitiness of the fermented fruit. There's the floral quality. That's very powerful. Now, blending with this, with Perique, can be a little tricky because of its flavor enhancing qualities. So when you add it to Latakia, which it is a perfect mate for, it brings out the deep sweetness and smokiness of the Latakia. Some of those woody sort of notes in it. They complement each other perfectly. When you mix it with this, the reason it does so well with a Virginia is because Virginia, especially matured Virginia, has a fermented fruit, kind of a figgy, raisiny quality on its own, plus sweetness. The floral nature of Perique plus that fermented fruit note works perfectly. They are also perfect mates. Now, the one thing that sometimes this is what I think people say they hate Perique. When it's added with blends that have Oriental, depends on the Turkish Oriental that you add it to, and it's so moist it is hard to stay lit. It can draw out and pump up the harshness of the Oriental. And some Orientals have this tendency to be spicy or sour or tangy, as I've discussed, or as I will discuss next time. But I've mentioned it in past videos. The Perique enhances those qualities. So you might get more sourness. You might get a lot more spice. And what you think is the Perique, but it's actually the Oriental. So think about that for a little bit. Those flavors that you think that you're attributing to Perique, if you smoke it on its own, you'll realize it's not the Perique at all. Perique is mild flavored and floral in its smoke. None of that mushroominess really comes through in the flavor. I mean, there may be a hint of it that some more discerning palates can find in there. I can't taste it. It's all floral and dried fruit and maybe a wine flavor. There might be like this essence of like a kind of a leathery thing, but those are all qualities that you might attribute to wine also. You might even taste the oakiness in there from the barrels. But when you add it in your blends, what you want to do is start very small and slowly pump up that quality, or that percentage, to get those floral notes, and maybe start recognizing those a little bit. Plus, it's great to pump up nicotine content if, say, like a Virginia, which is pretty moderate to low, or a Cavendish, which is practically no nicotine at all. Adding this to it creates this enhanced flavors of anything that it comes in contact with. And when you add it to your blends, be sure that you allow time for the Perique to work on the tobacco that you've mixed it with. So give it, I suggest anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. Longer if you can stand it. I have a hard time waiting when I make a new blend. But add it in, start small, and be sure that you give it plenty of time to work with the tobacco to actually create that enhancing quality, and so that the flavors kind of move back and forth between your base tobacco and your Perique. I just like Kentucky, and probably the same I'll say with most condiment tobaccos, Oriental being the exception, but keep it no more than 10% in your blends, and I think you'll find that the flavors of your blends will be greatly enhanced. The flavors will come through with even more intensity. And I think you'll find that you are actually a fan of Perique. Get some. This is the challenge this week. Get some Perique. Try it on its own. Smoke it. I like to use a bigger bowl just because I like Perique. Again, Missouri Meerschaum sells these tiny little, it's like a thimble almost, but it's great for tasting. Sell these for $2 or $3, and you can buy a handful of them for all of your tobacco tastings. And so that's the challenge this week. Try it and tell me what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to have a discussion with you over email. You can send me an email to westtexpiper@gmail.com. And as always, I hope that you have a very blessed week and a blessed new year. And I hope that you all take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.